Draft science video, I guess. Responding to Numbly Num. So the subject's really just going to be about rotation and spin, mostly. And what's, how to properly define, movement of celestial bodies in relation to the layers of relationship that exist. The relationship of the Earth to the sun to the moon, the earth to the moon, and how we should describe what's happening to something, how to accurately define its circumstance. And so, I'm in a conflict with Numbly Num over what's an appropriate description. So the argument is that he's saying it's ludicrous. This is ludicrous. That the fact that the moon spins on its axis is something that just can't be denied, and it's purely appropriate to describe it as spinning on its axis. My argument, counter argument to him is that some person standing on Earth is doing exactly what the moon is doing. That is, it has an orbit facing the body it's orbiting. We orbit the center of the Earth, the center of gravity of the Earth, because we're dragged around with the surface of the Earth. And in a sense, we're doing exactly what the moon is doing, and that if I stand on the Earth, the same part of my body is always going to be facing the center of the Earth. So in a one-day rotation, my feet will always be facing the center of the Earth, just like the face of the moon will always be the same face facing the center of the Earth. And as the moon rotates, it rotates exactly the same way as a human being rotates on the surface of the Earth. And so if you're going to say that the moon is spinning on its axis, you'd have to argue that a human being or a tree on Earth, is spinning on its axis. And I don't think anybody would say that, so that they'd see that there's, oh yeah, well this is a relativistic argument. Yes, you could say a tree on Earth is spinning on its axis relative to the sun. So if you accounted for the fact that if I just took the tree and I rotate the Earth and the tree relative to the sun, well then you'd say, yes, look, the tree rotated. See, it went once around, so it rotated on its axis. But I don't think anybody would say that. I just don't think they would say trees rotate. Because, from the perspective of the Earth, they certainly don't. And so that's where this gets into like semantics or something. I mean, it's just not something you go, this is such a fact that I'm going to call you ludicrous if you would argue that this isn't the appropriate thing to call it. The moon isn't really rotating on its axis. It's just being forced, in a sense, because of its velocity and its trajectory as it's being bent through gravity, to make the appearance of a rotation. It's a forced rotation. So I would argue that there might be a difference between something that's rotation is a manifestation of its own forces, its own momentum, and a rotation that's a manifestation of a synchronicity with some other body that's not directly influencing it, but only indirectly is relevant. I don't even know how to say it. I don't know how to take the edge off of that. But the real point is from his perspective, by his definition of rotation, I could never have a body enter a gravitational influence with any velocity whatsoever and it not be rotating on its axis. Because even if I rotated it to compensate for this tree effect, the fact that the tree, if I try to rotate the tree the opposite way to pretend the tree is not rotating relative to the sun, then I have made the tree rotate relative to the Earth. So either way, you're going to be able to make the argument that it rotated. So it's impossible to be anything else but a rotation. But I'm just saying, I don't think it's honest to the circumstance to describe something that's spinning because of an internal mechanism and something being spun by external mechanisms, in a way. I don't know how to exactly say that. It's a difference between a top spinning and a top spinning because it's on the Earth spinning. Yeah. And I think it's a purely understandable difference. So I'll read some of his comment and then I'll do the drawing. But really, I think you should already understand, without me, most people who know the moon always shows the Earth the same face. The same face of the moon is always pointed towards the Earth, and that it is only, and that circumstance could be duplicated. You could just imagine if I brought the moon twice as close, that same circumstance would exist. And if I made it twice as close again, or twice as close, and I finally pushed the moon all the way up to the face of the Earth, it's the same face. So even if the moon was sitting on the Earth, the argument would be as it spun on its axis every time the Earth spun. But the fact that the moon takes 26 days just means it's a slower rotation, but it's exactly the same mechanism. It's still got its feet pointed towards the center of the Earth, and that's all we ever see. And to call that a rotation, I just think, is dishonest. I mean, it would be as dishonest as for somebody to say trees rotate on their center of gravity axis. I just don't think that would be accurate to say that trees actually flip upside down and then right side up again once a day. I don't think people would say that. And that's the only way the moon is actually rotating, is the same way a tree is rotating. It's only rotating relative to the sun. Okay, this is ludicrous. The moon spins on its own axis, and you won't find any reputable scientific journal that says anything remotely close to the contrary. Well, then I'd say that those scientific journals have to also say trees rotate 26 times faster than the moon. That trees on Earth have a rotational speed 26 times faster than the moon. So show me the scientific journal that says that, and then I'll say that it's okay. This isn't an argument anymore. So I'm just saying that that's essentially the same thing. So if you want to say that scientists should be comfortable saying trees rotate 26 times faster than the moon's rotating, and that they could say that in public and it would make perfectly good sense to people, no, I think it would have to be explained that the rotation is only one of perception. From the sun's perspective, yes, trees rotate 26 times faster than the moon does. Again, the moon. Well, anyway, this is just stupid, right? I mean, you can't possibly win this argument. You just can't. And so you write all this shit to rationalize where you're wrong again, technically. And you're going to pretend that technically you're right. Well, I don't think you could possibly be technically right and tell me that reputable scientists routinely tell people and inform people that trees are rotating 26 times faster than the moon. Tidal locking, when the rotational and orbital periods of the celestial body achieve a one-to-one relationship, is the inevitable long-term consequence of a small body orbiting a larger one. So this is more just about the fact that over time, velocities are going to be spinning velocities. So you can imagine that when something's being created or built, and it's getting bombarded by meteors, that each one of those meteor impacts would have an angular momentum. They'd have an angle of orientation of impact, and that all of those orientations would impose on the body momentum in the direction. So they can make something spin slower, they can make something spin faster. Depending on the angle they come at, they would add velocity in some direction to the body. And so that spin would be a logical consequence of that happening. And that gravity, because of the way it warps shape, would inevitably take that velocity and migrate it to an equator. So that also makes sense over time. And that over time velocity is lost based on drag. There is some drag. Even though the universe is frictionless, it's not entirely frictionless. So if you're moving through a gravitational field, you'll end up hitting things in the field. and that will retard your velocity over time. But anyway, continuing. This is because due to the inverse square principle, I don't think it has anything to do with inverse square, to tell you the truth. Earth's gravitational pull on the moon is not constant across its surface, and the moon's equator is slightly more gravitated than its poles. This just has to do with, yeah, the obvious shape difference, but it's such a subtle difference in gravity. But again, that only has to do with the tilt and the fact that velocities will tend to migrate to the equator over time. So I'm not disagreeing with any of that. Let's see. Gravitational pull on the moon is not constant in the equator, slightly more gravitated than its poles, and thus over time its shape has been distorted towards the orbiting spheroid, similar to the way the Earth's shape has been distorted. Again, there's no argument with that. So what does that have to do with the fact that you're saying something merely because it orbits something, it automatically has what you call rotational spin? It rotates on its own axis just because it's orbiting something. So yes, relative to some other gravitational entity, it'll always appear as if it has a rotation. But it only has that rotation if you make it relative to a sun. You have to make it relative to some third party. The first person relationship is not rotational. All right. Over billions of years, the inconsistency of the Earth's gravitational effect has influenced the rotational period of the moon. Certainly the moon and the Earth are tugging at each other, and every time the moon cycles around to the sun's side, it creates extra gravity, and every time it goes to the far side, it's less gravity, and blah, blah, blah. Yes, yes, yes. Such as the orbital period is synchronous with the rotational period. Orbital period is synchronous with the rotational period. I don't think that's... You're just saying that the fact that the moon orbits once around the Earth it's not coincidental that the same face is always facing the Earth. But I don't think it's happening for the reason why you say they didn't become synchronous for any other reason than the fact that the moon hasn't had enough impacts to maintain any spin, and so it's lost its spin. The spin has been deteriorating over time, and it's lost its spin. I mean, its spin relative to the Earth. Because the Earth pulls the moon's equator both directions, thus equally locking its rotation to the Earth's particular mass in the most efficient way possible. So in both directions, I don't know what that means. Because the Earth pulls the moon's equator in both directions. I don't know what that means. So yeah, I can't make anything out of that. The fact that the moon has lost its rotation relative to the Earth, again, I think just has to do with the fact that any spinning object in gravity is going to have, there's going to be, if nothing maintains the spin, if there's no energy creating it, it will be deteriorated by the friction of the atomic particles within the thing itself. It'll generate heat, and it will lose its velocity based on the heat it takes to rotate. The rotational, the inefficiencies of rotating zillions and zillions of material objects. Again, gravity is a nuclear force, not a material force, essentially. It affects matter on its smallest scale, not the biggest scale. It only affects the little bits of matter. It's not affecting anything called a big piece of matter. The effects are all nuclear, and they have just expression as wholes. We just consider the moon one object, but the moon is in fact a zillion little teeny weeny moons all collected together, thus eventually locking the rotation of Earth's particular mass in the most efficient way possible. Well, efficient by what standard? Again, I don't think it has anything to do with efficiency. It has to do with the lack of meteor impacts, which have degraded any spin velocity that the moon may have at the past had. Here's a simple way to visualize the moon's rotation. Well, this I don't think is at all simple. Imagine you had a large bicycle gear with a chain joined to the smaller gear at a given distance. There is a certain length of chain the chain could be that could make one rotation of the chain equal to one rotation of the gear. Alright, so he's saying there's the two gears would have to be the same size then. For them to be a one-to-one relationship, they have to be the same size gear. If the force the chain exerted was used to move a smaller gear around a larger one, well then it has to be an offset gear, not a synchronous gear. The chain representing the moon's orbital momentum, the synchronicity of the chain of the smaller gear's rotation would mean that from the perspective of the larger gear, you would only ever see the same teeth of the smaller gear. Well, again, so now this is where I'll just draw my picture, and I'll just point out again that it was no difference. If you just consider a human being, let's say we could jump off the surface of the earth and we could actually stay, gravity didn't push us right back down. You could consider yourself then an orbiting body. And the fact is you'd still be carried, you have the same velocity, all the rest of this stuff, so you would just move around the earth just like anything else. And the point is, no one would argue that you're spinning on your axis. No one would argue that you spun on the axis of your belly button and went a full rotation. Again, no one would argue that trees are rotating. I mean, no one would argue it as anything else but some sort of, in some sort of purist sense. And again, you're saying that no reputable scientific journal. Well, can you find me a reputable scientific? Like I said, I think it's the absolute truth is that if you're going to use your definition of rotation, it would be accurate to say trees rotate 26 times faster than the moon. You argue that it is petty and fuzzy. No, here. It is obvious why celestial bodies rotate. I don't know if that's obvious. But do I really have to explain conservation of angular momentum? Well, it's really just conservation of, again, well, whether you call it directional velocities or anything else. Yes, all this stuff, all the arrows have to be conserved, and spin is part of that arrow conservation. But obviously a spin has built into it a sense of conservation. There's as much going this way as there is going this way on the other side. There's an equal and opposite reaction built into spin itself. So any rotation sort of has a conservation sort of built into it. But again, that doesn't account for speed. Something could move faster going one way and slower going the other way. Therefore, there would still need to be there would be an imbalance then in this conservation, because there would be more arrows going one direction, less arrows going another direction in the same amount of time, and therefore there had to be some imbalance that created that imbalance. And I challenge you to find even a single, perhaps I should have said it should be obvious to anyone who studied physics why celestial bodies rotate. Well, again, just change that argument to why trees rotate. Okay? Trees rotate once a day. So say it that way. Say it honestly. So it should be obvious to everyone that trees rotate once a day on planet Earth. And I challenge you to find even a single example of a planet, moon, star that has been observed not to rotate. Well, again, if I did rotate one, then you would say it's rotating because I rotated. If I actually did pull up a tree and rotate it one turn, you'd say it just rotated. But in fact, if I rotated exactly the opposite of the rotation the Earth is causing, then you'd say, what, it's not rotating? So I pull a tree out of the ground, and during the day I just turn it right around, put it back in the ground, right? So I take one day and do a full 24-hour turn of the tree. You're going to argue to me, okay, that now that tree didn't rotate because I kept it same face to the sun. So now that it was same face to the sun, it technically didn't rotate. Right? Isn't that the argument? Yeah, it is the argument. Okay, and I challenge you to find even a single example of planet, moon, star that has been learned not to rotate. Well, again, you're creating, by your definition of rotation, again, like I said, there's absolutely no such thing as anything that could be in association with another celestial body that you would argue isn't rotating. The crap in the earth is rotating, the lead, any piece of gold inside the earth, it's rotating right now. You're saying if there's a diamond sitting inside the Earth's crust, you're telling me basically, according to the sun, based on the sun as the center, it spun on its axis one time when the Earth rotated. That's your argument. Diamonds rotate. Now, how do I defeat that argument? You know, essentially, like I said, if I actually move the diamond and turn it, you're going to say for sure it rotated relative to the Earth. So there's no way that something can exist without rotating. Nothing can exist in a system of gravity without rotating by the definition you're imposing. Okay. If you can, I'll never comment on draft science again. Well, I guess what I can say is that you really shouldn't comment on draft science again if you can't find me a scientific journal that talks about how trees rotate 26 times faster than the moon. It is obvious why celestial bodies rotate. Oh, I did that. You argue that it is petty and fuzzy for me to point out that the moon rotates. Yeah, I think it's petty because, number one, the subject was about rotational speeds that would create things like gravity and magnetism. Obviously, a 26-day rotation wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't have enough energy. It wouldn't create enough energy to create something called gravity. So if you depended gravity on rotational speed, that speed wouldn't be nearly fast enough to create anything we would call gravity. So I just don't think that was so relevant to the conversation I was having. It's totally tangential, because quite obviously it's an insignificant rotation compared to the kind of spin of like a top or a gyroscope. What keeps a gyroscope up? And they're talking about centrifugal and centripetal forces, okay, maintaining something. If I made a gyroscope that spun once every 365 days, you know it's not going to stand up. You know those forces aren't going to keep it standing. It would fall. It would be a non-working gyroscope. And clearly a moon that's all rotating once every 26 days, that rotation couldn't possibly be a description of some kind of force that's creating its gravity. All right, anyway, because the average person perceives, well, anyway, let's see. You argue that it's petty and fuzzy for me to point out the moon rotates even though it is a fact. Well, again, you're saying even though it's a fact. Well, again, so is it a fact that oak trees rotate on their axis 26 times more often than the moon in a month? Is that true? Because the average person perceives it that way and should be addressing my comments to this hypothetical average person's understanding of physics. Well, that really wasn't my point, but yes, I'm just saying that if we're gonna understand it, it has to have some sort of accurate context. And if you don't have an accurate context, then there's no point in having the conversation. So again, relative to the Earth, the moon is doing the same thing a tree is doing. So I'm just arguing that if you're going to make the argument that the moon is rotating on its axis, you have to make the argument that trees are rotating on their axis. And I'm just saying that does sound like it's going to create a continuity, a mental construct that doesn't going to make any sense. Rotation is going to lose its sensibility to people that have to discuss what it means. So I'm not saying it's inaccurate. I'm not saying that maybe we should migrate to this new position where we say anything in a gravitational field that has velocity, anything that has a sustainable orbit, is automatically rotating. The average person generally believes that faith is a good idea, that believing things for no reason just because is a good idea. Well, again, that wasn't my point in referencing the average person. My point is that even the average educated person is going to be a little bit uncomfortable saying oak trees, rotate 26 times a month. So should I just drool into my keyboard next time, or what? No, you should just say, look, it's not. It's an obscure point in the sense that quite obviously, just by raw understanding, the moon doesn't rotate relative to human perspective, and that's just a fact. It doesn't rotate relative to the face of the Earth. We never, from Earth, see the other side of the moon. Okay, it's invisible from Earth. We got the first pictures of it when we sent Apollo 9 or whatever it was, and it circled the Earth, I mean the moon. And those were the first pictures ever of the other side of the moon. I wasn't writing the comment for the average person, at least I didn't think I was. I was writing it to someone who has repeatedly claimed that they deserve a Nobel Prize. Ironically, I'm one of the few people who actually pay attention to your work in physics and found a lot of them quite agreeable. Well, I'm saying yes, it is sort of ironic too. I would argue that, you know, we can't find agreeable language, but yeah, I find you obnoxiously tedious. You make these comments on every fucking one of my videos. Every one of your fucking goddamn corrections is some sort of irrelevant, tangential fact, and it just seems like you're just doing it to be a pain in the fucking ass. It doesn't seem like any of them are corrections that have any substantive merit, okay? Again, defending PubMed or whatever the fuck it was called is crap. I mean, it's a bunch of crap articles. There's no reason to defend it. And there's no reason for you to point out that the moon's actually spinning on its axis when, frankly, the same face is always facing us, so it's really hard to say something's spinning when the same face is always facing you. But now you are going to argue that my comment is dishonest because I didn't address your idea of the average person's concept of the moon. No, you didn't address my idea, okay, of the fact that every human being would have to be said to be rotating on their axis, and every tree would be rotating on its axis, and every kernel of mineral in the Earth's crust would have to be rotating on its axis, that all of these things would be relativistically in exactly the same position as the moon, except they're rotating daily instead of once every 26 days. Okay, you argue that my comment was offensively off topic and it was inappropriate for me to point out that the moon rotates because your video was intended to critique the incoherent ramblings of some random guy and not the moon or your theory of whatever. I argue that claiming the moon doesn't rotate, well, again, I don't even know if I claimed it doesn't rotate. What I claimed was it's the same face of the Earth, the moon is always facing us, okay, so it doesn't have any independent rotation. That was my claim. Was a pretty serious error. Well, I don't think it was at all an error because the moon rotates just as much as fucking trees. Trees rotate more than the moon does. So I think until people start routinely talking about trees rotating, there's absolutely no point in them talking about the goddamn moon rotating. In all seriousness, do you think there are any school of physics or journal of physics or any of physics that wouldn't correct a glaring mistake like that regardless of what was being argued? Well, again, you're saying it's a glaring mistake. I'd say it's a glaring mistake not to include oak trees in bodies that have a rotational spin. So until we start saying that, yes, trees spin on their axis, one rotation daily, then we've misdescribed what trees are. So if that's the way the game you want to play here, if that's how you want to be, then go ahead and be that way. But I'm going to say I'm the one who's correct here and you're the one incorrect. Sorry. I say the moon doesn't rotate carries with it a lot of untenable implications. Well, I'm just saying that the untenable implications of you saying it does rotate are that trees should be declared orbiting bodies that are rotating 26 times faster than the moon. Most serious scientists would not feel comfortable allowing a sneak past at minimum standards of accuracy. Well, again, I don't think I'm saying anything accurate, and I'll demonstrate it in a drawing. And when seriously discussing anything in the domain of physics. Okay, so let's do the drawing. What the fuck? I probably should have had a light on for this. So, we don't need this hanger. Alright, so here's the sun. Here's the Earth. So what the Earth's doing, this is, let's just say, the orbit of the Earth in what we call 1 month. And so the moon in that 1 month, so let's just draw the moon and we'll just say its face towards the Earth is always the same. So we'll just have we'll put it dark as the face facing the Earth. And so as it goes around, so just pretend it moved around to this other location, but we're just going to go it's 26 or whatever day rotation, 20, I don't know, 27, who the hell cares? I'm not too worried about that detail. But the same face of the moon is always facing the Earth. Okay? Whoops, I did the wrong side. Oh, anyway, you get the picture. It's the same face. All right, and so in the 26 days, it goes from this location, it goes all the way around. So we'll just do the little arrow thing, and it goes around the Earth. So that's what it does. In this 26 days, it goes one rotation. So relative to this sun over here, okay, the moon, this face, kind of obviously rotated. But relative to the Earth, it didn't rotate. So you can just kind of see that, right? That as the sun shines on the moon, okay, it's going to hit the back side of the moon here, and then you're going to have your new moon over here because the Earth is going to block the moon and whatever. And anywhere close to there, you're going to have your full moons. So these would be your full moons in this location. Because we'll see the full side of the moon getting hit by the sun. And this would be your half moon, would be over here. This side of the moon gets hit by the sun, and this side is dark. But the side you see is still the same side. So you're still seeing the same. Half the moon is blacked out, but it's still there, the face. And you're just seeing what side the sun is hitting at this particular moment when you see a half moon or a quarter moon and all that kind of stuff. That just has to do with where the orientation of it to the sun. It doesn't have anything to do with the orientation towards the Earth. The orientation towards the Earth is always the same face. And so it's just like if I stuck a little human being on this Earth and I just stuck him up here in the air, okay, he'd be doing the same thing as the Earth spun once. So every rotation of the Earth, his feet are always pointed down, just like the Earth. The moon has the same face. He'd have the same, his crotch would be always facing the Earth. All right? And so technically, from the sun's perspective, yeah, he rotated on his axis. But from the Earth's perspective, you standing next to the guy, you're not going to say, hey, I saw him spin on his axis. Because you're spinning on your axis, but you don't really see that, right? You don't see yourself spinning, and you don't see him spinning. So I'm just saying that this is where it gets a little paradoxical, and for you to say it's totally inappropriate. Well, I'm saying it's totally inappropriate to say the moon is rotating on its axis is just the same as saying that an oak tree on the surface of the Earth, or a pine tree on the surface of the Earth, facing having its roots in the ground, when it spins once on the Earth, it's doing exactly the same thing as the moon does in those 26 days, which is rotate on its axis. But no one would say that trees daily rotate on their axis. No one would say the ocean flipped upside down. No one would say that. Right? The ocean spun. Miami Beach flew all the way over to Africa, and then Africa's beach flew all the way over to Miami. Nobody would say that. So that's the problem of this discussion. Now, you're saying my language is wrong, and I'm saying I don't think I'm wrong to say the moon is just as dead in the water as a goddamn oak tree in terms of rotation or spin. Either they're both spinning or either they're both dead. But whatever they are, they're both doing exactly the same thing. They're going around something. And by definition, you've made that spinning on your own axis, spinning on your center of gravity. You've made it impossible to call it anything else. So again, you have to say trees rotate. And I just think it just doesn't sound right. All right. So let's finish this up. Let's see. Did I stop here? Moon's motion. You argue that my comment was eventually off topic and it was inappropriate for me to point out that the moon rotates because your video was not intended to critique inherent ramblings of some brand. Okay, that I did. And your attempts to rebuke me with this guilt by association wrap-up is preposterous. Well, again, that's how you're describing it. I'm saying that every one of your last, 10 comments have been this snarky, one-sentence crap bullshit that just has nothing to do with the real subject of the video. It's just some sort of fact-checking that I think is really petty. Okay? I mean, the fact that yeast is qualified technically as a fungus is, again, sort of a mushy ground. You won't admit that it's a little bit of a mushy classification. It doesn't, fit in there really, really great. It only fits in there in some sort of slimy way because some yeast varieties of yeast, whatever you want to call them, species of yeast, whatever, do in fact create something like spores, but it's only something like. Anyway, certainly I wasn't defending the guy whose nonsensical video you were rightly exposing. Well, again, it doesn't matter whether you're defending him, you're doing it by fiat or by consequence, in the sense that you're sitting there saying, look, this is a fact checking and he's got a fact wrong. And so, I mean, you can't see how that's obviously, in a way, impugning my credibility, as if I said something outrageously wrong. And that's what you just did. You made it like I have a credibility gap because I stated that the moon doesn't really rotate. And I think that could have been understood, that I gave it enough context by pointing out that the moon is always facing the Earth, the same face is always facing the Earth, that negates the possibility of any spin or rotation that the moon would have through its own generation. And you still you wouldn't even accept that qualification, which I think just makes you a butthole, which I made quite clear in my rude and manipulative comment. Well, I think it is manipulative, again, when you don't acknowledge that it's only rotation by consequence, by incidental. It's only incidental to the existence of the sun. If the sun doesn't exist, you're going to have a harder time making this rotation argument. Here's the entire thing. Gravity isn't caused by rotation, but the moon does rotate. So again, you're just pointing out the moon does rotate and posting a link to an article that doesn't explain how oak trees are rotating 26 times faster. So until this article says oak trees rotate 26 times faster, there's really no point in posting me to that link, right? Because it doesn't really explain what they mean by rotation, which is incidental rotation caused by the fact that anything going around the Earth, anything on the surface of anything on something that's moving with a velocity around any center of gravity is going to be called rotating from any third-person perspective. So if you're not going based on the center of gravity, it's always going to be rotating relative to some other point in space. I'll leave it to others to decide whether or not my comment was rude. Well, I'll just ask others to go and recognize the context. Like I said, that his fact-checking has been to point out that the mass of the human body is substantially made out of DNA from microbes. We didn't say DNA, but you used the word mass in a sentence describing microbes and telling me how most of the human mass, well, again, it's not exactly what he said. He just used the word mass. The mass of the human body is somehow substantially related to some microorganism argument, bacteria. That humans are mostly bacteria. And obviously it was a misleading statement in my opinion and served no purpose. And then he got onto the stupid yeast isn't a bacteria, it's a fungus. And so on and so forth, and you can just measure every one of these comments as just being snarky little corrections that had nothing to do with the primary subject. And in the other case, the primary subject was what causes penises to smell, and I don't think it matters whether you blame bacteria or funguses. Neither one of those are good things. But anyway, but if you ask me, I'd say that if that comment really offends you, you are more than merely thin-skinned. Well, again, like I said, if it was one comment, I'd say, okay, who cares? But it's every video you've been doing this on lately, and in my opinion, you're fundamentally dishonest in terms of what your agenda is. So I think some of it does have an agenda tied to it. I think you got all butthurt about this circumcision subject, and I think that's when this all started. So in my opinion, that was the generator of it. But it doesn't really matter because we've seen where it's going. And so it's just going to be a perpetual battle where you're going to sit there and keep correcting me on these irrelevant to the subject of the video factoids that, again, I would argue these aren't really good facts, okay? PubMed is not a really good reservoir of scientific documentation. It's just not. It's a shitty reservoir, and that's what you should be saying. Okay? The distinction between yeast and fungus, bacteria and fungus is not a distinction worth paying any attention to for a subject about food poisoning or something. It's going to be quite irrelevant. And this distinction about whether you can say that the moon is a rotating celestial body is totally irrelevant to what they're arguing. And they're arguing that gravity is a manifestation of spin. And quite obviously the moon doesn't have enough spin relative to even like the Earth's spin or any other planet's rotational speed to manifest anything called gravity. Alright. I'll have to go for now, but I'll address your other issues discussed in this video later. Yeah, well, I don't really care. I politely just said, go the fuck away. I really don't want to be bothered with this nonsense. I don't think it's productive. I don't think you're at all helpful. So, yeah, like Flyora. Pre-Med is a real science site. Well, so this guy published here. Here's another example of what you consider real science. So then he posted a link. With treatment and rehabilitation and intercessory prayer to Saint Luigi Gorilla Gonorrhea, this patient was able to recover close to baseline from a Glasgow coma scale of 7. So it was in a 7-scale coma, and a little bit of prayer cured him. Yeah, that's real science, I'm sure. I don't even know what the hell is this anyway? I mean, it doesn't matter. You probably don't watch these videos anyway. You know, the physics videos. But what the fuck is this? Pre-Med is real science. What authority are you? Did you evaluate the articles in that repository of bullshit? What do you know about what they've scrutinized, what they looked at, what they haven't? What do you know about any of that? You're just making a proclamation? From what? Yeah, right. So anyway. I mean, just incredible. I mean, what's your expertise on the subject? What the fuck do you know about it that I don't? Yeah, nothing. Alright, so anyway. I just don't get these people. So, oh yeah, so I might as well go, I'll go to the last physics video. Let's see, possible description of reality, no. Ephelism is, no. What the fuck? No. Wow, it's a long time ago, apparently. I haven't made a, here we go, Truth Quest, waste of time. I think that was the last physics video. Yeah, I think so. So we'll see if there's any other comments worth commenting on. Okay, gravity isn't caused by rotation, but the moon does rotate. So he did emphasize does, and he posted the link. Let's see if there's anything else he said in here. Oh, and then the other one's this idiotic Just FFR Films guy who can also go fuck himself. Let's see, he said, over time the rotation was slowed enough that the moon's orbit and rotation matched. The same face became tidally locked forever and pointed towards the Earth. And let's see what he says that. Yes, the same face always points towards the Earth because one rotational period is exactly the same as one orbital period. Well, again, if you want to make this argument, it's the same as true for oak trees. This is kind of strange coincidence that the rotation and orbit are so exactly synchronized. Well, it's not at all strange, again, because it's not because it has rotational speed, it's because its rotational speed has been consumed by the gravity of the Earth. The Earth has overwhelmed its rotation. But if the moon didn't rotate, we would actually see the other side. So here's the funny part. If the moon didn't rotate, we would actually see the other side. Now, see how that doesn't make any sense? So if the moon didn't rotate, we would see the other side because it would be rotating from our perspective. You get it? I mean, that just doesn't work. So you might as well just say anything, any matter that's connected to any other piece of matter rotates on its axis. There's no way to avoid it. Anything involved in any gravitational relationship automatically, just two quanta rotating around each other, automatically have to be rotating on their axis from any other single point in space. I don't think there's any non-rotating planet, stars, moons. I think the conservation of angular momentum would make this nearly impossible because the huge spheres are created by spinning acceleration disks. Well, I don't think that's how they're created. I think they're created by consuming matter moving, and that movement is never perfectly balanced, and so everything ends up having some sort of spin based on the fact that it's hit more one way than it's hit the other way. Fair enough. The universe is a funny place. Have you seen The Sidewalk Astronomer? Also, a different documentary. Well, I don't think any of that is relevant. So Truth Quest, another annoying, irritating piece of shit that I wish would go away. Your arrogance and ignorance is astounding. Funny how someone like you can talk out of his ass for years. Well, again, I'm not talking about my ass. I draw pictures. I got all this trouble to explain. I use all kinds of metaphors. I explain how it's consistent with the inverse square rule, and it's consistent with this and that. I do all that work, and you just ignore it. So fuck you. Without proving any of his theories. So again, I think I am demonstrating rational, reasonable, logical proofs. What I've done is disprove the disproofs. Okay, Feynman claimed he did away with, he dismissed the fact of material or kinetic gravity, Lesage gravity, because he didn't diagram it correctly. Now, is that my fault or Feynman's fault? Again, he diagrams a particulate gravity as being one where actual meteorites are hitting atoms, and that's, you know, clearly a little bit of imagination by a nuclear physicist could have imagined a frictionless particle interactions, a pure kinetic interaction, one that doesn't degrade the particle. I mean, this is a guy who knows what a photon is. Did he ever see a half a photon? No. So he knows what an indestructible particle is, and yet he couldn't imagine one when he did his critique. I mean, that's how bullshit his critique was. What did he use as a metaphor? Rain. Yeah, that was a fair cop. No, that wasn't. That's what you call a jerk-off. But what's worse is that your ideas themselves don't make any sense either. Says you. But when someone else has another theory, you bash this out of them. Well, I'm just saying, I'm at least giving them that shot, right? I'm making a counter-argument. They can counter-argue my argument, can't they? I played Feynman's critique of Lesage of gravity, and I pointed out how it's absolute fucking bullshit. I played Feynman talking about the two-slit experiment and ignoring single-slit diffraction, and I outed him as a jerk. Okay, he's dead, so he can't defend himself, but all these Feynman lovers should be able to make a video pointing out how I'm wrong in that critique. One of these assholes like Piro who wants to defend Feynman, why don't you explain how I'm wrong in my critique that Feynman's goddamn video on two-slit diffraction was complete, absolute motherfucking cunt bullshit because he never mentioned single-slit diffraction. I mean, how can you do a video on the two-slit experiment and leave out, not point out that there's such a thing as single-slit diffraction? I mean, isn't that just being a fucking liar? So what's stopping you, Truth Quest guy? Why don't you point out how Feynman was right? Let's see. You haven't even tried thinking about what I said, nor did you look into the links I posted. Well, that's just an absolute fucking lie. So anyway, the video I posted with the Truth Quest guy, this is this video. I quite obviously went to the pages. I quite obviously read some measure of it. That's how I could know that it's related to a bunch of religion, which I'm totally uninterested in. I mean, physics and religion, these two things don't go together at all, and there's no explanation how any of this shit has anything to do with God or Jesus or any of that shit anyway, and it's all just the same old crap anyway. It's just all this fucking idiotic, what's-his-face, spin bullshit. What's his name? the guy who didn't write shit, okay? The greatest physicist in the history of mankind who wrote just about nothing on physics. I don't know if that makes you dumb or just your egoism has rotten your ability to think or eaten away at your patience. Well, I'm just saying I am pretty impatient with people telling me the greatest physicist who ever lived and he didn't write a single goddamn paragraph on the subject of physics. Well, I think it's pretty hard to call that a physicist, frankly. And frankly, there's absolutely nothing in the mumbo-jumbo you idiots are trying to call an explanation that it all sounds like anything I would call an explanation. I mean, all this fucking topsy-turvy, centripetal, clockwise, counterclockwise, bibble, babble, bobble. Doesn't explain one goddamn bit how fucking the moon ends up heading towards the Earth. Nothing. It doesn't say anything about the force gluing them together. You refute Feynman and Einstein all the time, yet you have no proof on top of that. On top of that, your theories don't even make sense on paper. Well, again, you're just making the same accusations again. On what piece of paper do they not make sense? I'm just saying that, look, Einstein is just describing a convergence, as I've pointed out. That's all it is. And the mechanism of the convergence is what I'm describing. I'm explaining why there's a convergence. There's a convergence because the universe itself is an active, energetic place, and it's just because we don't see that energy, okay? But it's there, and it's creating a real pressure that's creating the convergence, okay? So the convergence isn't space bending. The convergence is space being active and aggressive. The little bits are all BBs. They all move. Anything that doesn't move doesn't exist. It's all little moving bits. And that's why there's a convergence. So I think that's a pretty damn fucking goddamn good explanation. I mean, nothing space bends and tells the matter where to go. Well, that doesn't sound right, does it? Does it sound sensible for Einstein to say that nothing is telling the something what to do? I'm at least giving you a something telling the something what to do. But when someone else puts on out theirs, you make a hell of a lot of sense, then you shit. What? And they make a hell of a lot of sense. Well, where do they make a hell of a lot of sense? Why don't you again explain to me somehow how all this convolutions, all this fucking goddamn bullshit of this spiraling bibble babble, how the fuck that actually manifests into something called attraction or repulsion. Try to explain to me exactly how that, as a model, explains a motherfucking thing. The magical swirly bits go swirly swirly and then they end up being attracted to each other by the swirly rule. Well, fuck you. That's not an explanation of anything. Frankly, I can't see it in my brain. I've made an effort to do it. I've read this shit and I can't understand a motherfucking bit of it. That's my fault? Fuck you. Somehow they are an idiot. Well, they're an idiot if they're going to talk about the rotation of the moon causing gravity on the moon, because that's just stupid, because that rotation is so fucking pitifully slow, there's no way it could manifest any energetic force that could actually pull a human being into the moon. Funny. But whatever, that's what YouTube is all about. I guess everybody has an asshole. Well, I'm just saying that you again, Tesla, that's it. See, this guy's got fucking Tesla image on here, right? Truth Quest. Tesla, the greatest physicist ever known, and yet he didn't even write on fucking postcards. The guy lived a pretty long time. He lived in New York City his whole fucking goddamn motherfucking cunt life, a place where there's lots of places to write shit down. I mean, he really didn't have much of a life, just lived in his apartment building. You think he could have written down something? I mean, for fuck's sake. Why didn't he do more interviews? Why didn't he do something? He didn't do shit. Except patent everything on Earth. I mean, it was the golden age of patenting, you have to admit, okay? That was his real advantage. He lived in the golden age of patenting where you could just patent almost everything. I can imagine a time when there's this little plastic thing you put on your eye and it makes you see better. I mean, you could patent everything back then. All you had to do was have a little bit of imagination. You didn't have to actually make something that works. Fuck. Black holes are just a theory. Give me a break, man. Just be some kook out there on YouTube and you bring his house down does not mean I cannot bring your house down. Well, whatever that rhetoric, logical empiricist, which does not have anything to do with empirical logic at all. Go ahead, asshole. I'm inviting you. Please, tear down my house. Okay? But do it with an argument, for fuck's sake. Do it with a fact. You're not doing any of that, shithead. You're just slandering me, you fucking wannabe fighter for justice and truth and all that crap. You wannabe Superman. You're a fucking duty man. You're fart man. You are, in theory, as cocky as some other assholes with perpetual motion machines. Well, again, you've associated me with something that I don't not associate with, so how exactly have I made any claims like that? I haven't. And proofs for driving angles into 3. Proofs for dividing angles into 3. And proofs for, I don't know what that means. Fuck you, you amateur fucking wannabe scientist. Yeah, I just don't have an argument. So, okay, you don't think I have credentials. Fine. But even if I had them, I think you'd still be making the same argument, so I don't even see how that makes any sense. So, you don't understand. Okay. I think I've made reasonable arguments about why other stuff doesn't satisfy the obligations. Okay, especially there's one guy who linked me to like the inverted universe or something. There's actually idiots who think the whole planet Earth is concaved and that the real universe is inside the Earth, and that actually works somehow. Yeah, you can't even come close, right? We flew to the moon, so how did we fly to the moon if the moon is going towards the middle? Then we'd end up seeing all the other planets bigger and shit. I mean, it wouldn't work. Well, anyway, I mean, the fact that it wouldn't work is obvious. It's idiotic. All right, so this is where Numbly Numb comes in again. And this one, he's not even, he's whatever, pretending to be helpful, maybe? I don't know. Black holes have not been demonstrated to exist. In 2014, astrophysicists predicted that a large gas cloud was observed to be making a close path to a galactic Berry center, which would be consumed by the black hole and allegedly exhibited, but absolutely nothing happened. Well, see, to say absolutely nothing happened is just totally, again, to say unmolested, the gas cloud was unmolested, that's inaccurate. Clearly, there's a huge gravity at that location, okay? Whether it qualifies as a million suns, that could be argued. But clearly, there's a substantial black gravity, okay? So I like the idea of just calling these dark stars. But black hole has a whole significance where they're arguing that a black hole is black because it's consuming light. That's what I find, that's the description where I say that's inaccurate. Light cannot be consumed by gravity, so it's just absolute nonsense. Matter gets consumed by gravity, not light. Light can't be affected by gravity, so it's just to me that's where black hole theory ends. The fact that there are substantial gravitational bodies that are black, that is, they are producing no sunlight, yes. And the reason why it's not producing light could be a lot of reasons. And some of these things do have very high emissions in radio waves or X-rays or other radiation, Hawking's radiation, whatever the fuck that is, right? So I think they just invented that, frankly. Still invisible, you know, make-believe radiation. But anyway, the point is that they're black, meaning they don't produce visible light. That doesn't mean they're not producing some sort of energy. And I would argue that they don't even need to produce energy. There could be things where it's still going all in and nothing's coming out. Like the Earth. Yeah, the Earth is gaining weight. I mean, it's eating more than it's spewing. Anyway. Oh, Truth Quest again. You're wrong almost everything you've said. There's no such thing as gravitons, and they'll never find them. Well, obviously, we found them. You're actually a thermometer for them. Okay, I mean, everything gravitational is actually detecting them. So I guess in a way it's silly to say we'll never find them. I don't think you'll ever find a photon in any direct way. And yes, the moon does rotate on its axis. Well, again, so he posted to it also. So, yeah, so Numbly Numb, you're being as useful as the Truth Quest guy who is absolutely useless. I wonder if it's the same page they link to. Space.com, let's see. Space.com, wasn't that coincidental? Convenient, or I guess somebody stole somebody. I would argue that Truth Quest probably 5 days ago. Numbly Numb 5 days ago. Yeah, no way to hell. But who cares? Show me the real science page where they get really serious about science and they explain how oak trees are rotating on their axis. They really are. Relative to the sun. That's what they're doing every fucking day. They spin once around. Just like the moon every 26 days. Yeah. Anyway. Fuck you all. Yeah, just fuck you people. You really are just so obnoxious. So I will continue. Next video, I will do some more tedious fucking drawing work. I'm still working. I mean, it's just, yeah, I'm just really close. But, you know, you see, I am concerned with this rotational thing. Maybe it has something to do with the acceleration and the fact that the gravity is being caused by acceleration. It's inductive, so it's like electricity and magnetism. Magnetism induces electricity. Electricity induces magnetism. Gravity is likewise induced by acceleration. And these are all important things, because induction means the collection, the changing of something's orientation, the number of arrows it possesses in a certain direction. And when you collect arrows, that means you deny somebody else their yeah, they can't be going somewhere else if you're collecting them. I mean, that's sort of obvious, right? Yeah. They can't be two places at once. So if they're hanging out with you, they're not someplace else. And that place where they're not someplace else is going to notice the deficit. Sounds pretty logical to me. Anyway, till next time.